Welcome to the weekly meetup, guys. So as usual, I'll give a small recap of what's happened over the last week. But this meeting, I'm going to do something a little different. Rather than a segment about what's upcoming, I actually have two sort of, let's call them talks that I kind of want to go over on two topics. And so hopefully Lutz will be able to cut these talks from the meeting this week and sort of put them into their own separate videos on YouTube so that they can be easily distributed, especially when people have questions about the project, because I feel like it addresses two of the main concerns, I think, and two of the very frequent questions that come up in regards to the project. So the first talk that I wanted to talk about relates to the sidechain that we're working on, Novusphere and EOS. And the second talk that I wanted to focus on was the censorship and liability of certain content on the blockchain. So this is something that's somewhat already been discussed in the community, and I've already written an article about it. But I wanted to go into a little bit more detail in regards to it. So, first I'll start with the recap. Finally, at the start of this week, we are finally done all the major refactoring that's been going on. There's been a lot of refactoring over almost like the last 2 weeks. So we had some refactoring I had to do with the UI and sort of the main functionality term, and now we've had some refactoring in terms of that it's reusable, so that it's reusable in other projects. And speaking of other projects, this refactoring that's recently happened has made it a lot easier now for other code bases, such as, for example, the anime project that Code Blue is working on to reuse this code. So I'm expecting sometime next week, he'll probably have an update in terms of what's been going on in terms of development for that, and probably something new to show everyone. Some of the other things that I recently added is, so this is going to sound kind of vague, but I'll go into it once I get to my talk about censorship and liability. So it's something I call the Decensorship Logic in terms of posts, and so basically it's an automated system that's built into the client UI, and if it detects that a post has been censored, so I'll get into what that actually means, it then tries to find a fallback mechanism to decensor the post. So in terms of user experience, they don't actually see any of this happen. It's just as if they see the post as if it was never censored in the first place. But just to add some clarification, when I say a post has been censored, I don't mean that it's been moderated. So those are two different things. Because obviously, if it was moderated, well, it's very easy to just opt out of that given moderation setting. Another big change that's recently happened in the last week is we've now enabled it so that anonymous users can post on any sub. This is a pretty big change because previously anonymous users were quarantined to only posting in anonymous subs. And the reason we had done that was due to spam control. And now that we actually have a way of dealing with this, because we have anonymous identities, it's fine if anonymous users post in any sub. And over the coming days/weeks, we'll see some more expansions in terms of anonymous identities, especially in terms of moderator functionality to deal with that. And we want to make anonymous identities feel less like a second-class citizen in terms of having an actual EOS account. So ideally, we want people, even without an EOS account or any knowledge of crypto, to be able to use the platform in such a way where the learning curve isn't extremely difficult, and they don't have to buy or obtain anything to get started. And lastly, the last thing I wanted to cover in the recap is we have gotten rid of the limit in terms of post size. So before, the post size was artificially limited to 10 kilobytes of content, so roughly around 10k characters. Now the way we did this was if you have any hashtags past 10k characters, they actually won't show up, for example, in a search. So ideally, but I figure in most cases, if your post is over 10k, it's usually in the case of transcribing, for example, an article onto the blockchain or something like that. Now, this only actually applies to opening posts of a thread. So if you're replying to a thread, you still have the 10k restriction, and the 10k restriction comes from the code that's in the EOS form contract. So it's currently not really something that we can edit ourselves, but if there was a big enough demand, obviously we could move to a different contract instead of using the standard EOS form contract. So with that, I'm gonna get into the first talk that I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to talk about sidechains, Novusphere, and EOS, and sort of explain the sidechain that we're working on. So I guess what I'll start with is the sidechain that we're working on. Its main purpose is to add fungibility to EOS, and so this is a big problem that suffer from. So to give you an obvious example, so we're seeing a big rise in staking, which is really awesome, blockchain, which is really awesome because that means that people are able to send money to other people in a peer-to-peer fashion. And when I say money, I mean already familiar to people, even if with blockchain. So, for example, in the case of Ethereum, you have DAI, which is a stable coin that's dollar, the US dollar. But it follows the US dollar. So what anonymity and fungibility adds to this, for example, is if I have this stable coin, like let's say I have, so sorry, I've been corrected in chat. Yes, it's collateralized. That's the correct way to put it. So say I have 1,000 DAI, and I want to send you 10 DAI, so $10. When I go to make that transaction, because the blockchain is transparent and it's not anonymous in this case, you can actually see my remaining balance of 990 DAI. Unless I've split it up over multiple addresses ahead of time. And even then, there might be some degree of taint over how I've split it up. So unless you're very technical in terms of understanding how blockchain analysis works, it's very easy to taint addresses and link an identity between addresses. So this is very problematic, right? So for example, imagine you're a very well-off individual. So imagine instead of $1,000, it's $1 million. Well, maybe you don't want everyone in the whole world knowing you have $1 million, right? So if you send someone $10, you might not want them to know that, oh, I have $1 million. So this can be very problematic, that we don't have this anonymity. And then as for the fungibility aspect of it, we have what's called tainted coins in Bitcoin. And maybe this doesn't exist so much in other blockchains, but I think a really good example of it is the case of Ethereum. So in Ethereum, there was an incident a while back where a smart contract was hacked, a bunch of Ethereum was stolen, and they essentially did a hard fork to remove these tainted Ethereum, these tainted coins out of circulation. And so the way they do that is they discriminate against a particular address. And so in the case of Bitcoin, for example, if you have tainted coins and let's say these coins through blockchain analysis have been associated in some sort of, let's say, illicit activity, and then you go and send those coins to maybe something like Coinbase, which actively engages in blockchain analysis, then they might start scrutinizing you and asking you, well, where did you get these coins from? And you might have to prove a lot of things to them, and they might sort of bar you from your money or make it very difficult for you to gain access to your money if that's the case. So in fungibility, for example, if you think about it in terms of cash, it's like, well, if I'm paid $20 and then I take that $20, I pay it to someone else, the person I pay it to doesn't have a history of who that $20, of like where that $20 came from. They don't have any of that additional information, so it's fungible in that sense that $20 is $20, or the joke one Doge is one Doge. So this is why anonymity and fungibility is so important in the blockchain, especially as we see it starting to grow in terms of a means of paying people and a means of commerce. So what the sidechain that we're working on addresses is it brings anonymity and fungibility to all assets on EOS. So this is really important. I want to highlight that our goal here isn't just to bring fungibility to Atmos, which is the coin associated with our project. The goal is to affect all of the EOS ecosystem, and for all of the EOS ecosystem to benefit from what we're doing. So the way this works is when you have a sidechain, it's very easy for the sidechain to monitor what is happening on the main chain. So the main chain being the EOS mainnet. But what isn't easy to do is, well, the EOS mainnet doesn't know anything about this sidechain because, well, obviously the EOS mainnet can exist entirely without the sidechain, whereas the sidechain is dependent on the EOS main chain. So what this means is that implementing moving coins to a sidechain is very easy because, again, the sidechain is monitoring what's happening on the main chain. What's not easy is moving coins from the sidechain back to the main chain. So if we look at other projects and we look at how they handle this, a good example to look at is the Rootstock project in the Bitcoin space. So what Rootstock is it's basically a smart contract platform. But it's on Bitcoin as a sidechain, and they use the same Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM. But instead of Ethereum, they use Bitcoin as their primary currency. So when you move coins to the Rootstock sidechain, you're moving Bitcoin. But okay, so the interesting question here is, okay, so how do they handle moving back these coins from Rootstock back to the Bitcoin main chain? Now, the way they currently handle that is they use a federated system. So what this means is there is a board of people that have been selected. And when I say selected, I don't mean in a decentralized fashion. Nobody really chose these people. It's a centralized board of people. And essentially they have a big multi-signature wallet. And so when you want to move coins back from the sidechain to the main chain, they have an automated piece of software that these people are running that sort of monitors the sidechain and then will sign the multi-sig transaction to release these coins on the main chain. So the way we handle this, and the way Atmos ties into all of this, is when you go to move your asset back from the EOS sidechain to the main chain, validators instead of this federated board determine whether this is a valid request or not. So the way this happens is when you have funds on the sidechain, first you make a transaction which destroys or burns the funds on the sidechain. So you've reduced the supply of that particular asset on the sidechain. And then what you have to do is you make another transaction on the mainnet, which is a claim for these burned funds. So you're now asking for these funds to be released to you on the mainnet. Now, the validators, which are people that are staking Atmos to be allowed to be a validator, just like in our case of our federated board, the validators run a piece of software which validates the integrity of the sidechain for fraud, and they can then automatically vote on whether to release these funds from the contract or not. And then the incentive model that ties into this is that when an asset is moved to the sidechain, a small fee can be deducted from it, and when an asset is moving back from the sidechain to the main chain, a small fee can be deducted from it. So you can have a fee that goes both ways, and this doesn't need to be a centrally planned fee. It could even be a fee that's dynamically set by the system, which the validators choose themselves. Another thing that's important is validators can also choose what assets are allowed to move to um, the sidechain. So, for example, validators might not want some no-name token to move to the sidechain, because after all, that no-name token is what's going to be paid to them as a fee in this case. And there could be various systems in place as to how a token is listed on the sidechain in terms of being eligible to move to the sidechain. So, for example, one method could be that validators have to vote on whether something should be allowed to be able to move to the sidechain. Another system could be that that token or particular project needs to have a certain number of Atmos staked or burned or something along those lines to be able to list that asset on the sidechain. So there's a number of different ways that this can be gone about, and we really haven't set in stone a particular way that this is going to be done, and we can experiment with different ways as we approach the testnet phase of the sidechain. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can go about this, and we can discuss as a community what the best way is. Now, one of the most important things that how I see this sidechain being used is once there is more reliable and popular stablecoins on EOS. So at this current point in time, we've seen a lot of the stablecoins in the ecosystem being more focused at this point in time on Ethereum. But what I would point out is the guys who built DAI, which I currently believe is the best stablecoin available, particularly because this is a stablecoin that is collateralized and you don't have to trust a central party to hold together this one-to-one peg against a US dollar in a reserve. These guys really borrowed heavily from the BitShares methodology of how to do collateralization in terms of assets and pegs. And so this was really something that was a big part of GAN's projects in the past. So I think stablecoins will definitely come to EOS in the very near future, especially with a lot of the things that are being worked on currently for EOS. So hopefully our sidechain project can bring fungibility and anonymity to this, because to me, for example, when you have a stablecoin that has a transaction time of 500 milliseconds and has very fast settlement to the point of where settlement occurs almost within the same amount of time it takes to do a credit card transaction, the only thing you're missing from that to essentially have true digital cash, and when I say digital cash, I mean digital fiat cash, is the anonymity and fungibility aspect of it. But most importantly, because this encompasses any possible asset, you could even have, for example, gold-backed assets, or even tokens like EOS itself, or Atmos, or whatever token you want in the EOS space. So I think that covers the majority of what I wanted to say about how the sidechain works and what Atmos's core role is in terms of the sidechain. So now I want to move a little bit to the topic of censorship and liability.